Hello, welcome to Spindle City Straight Talk. I'm Chip,
And I'm CJ.
and it is Friday in the Riv. And
And it's a
as
rainy
usual,
time out there.
yeah, it actually just started, and I may have to dash off to close some windows. I don't know, but yeah, it is Friday in the Riv. Another day, and it looks like we've got a few things to talk about. I guess that I don't know how the resolution was. I guess the Herald News went to court yesterday uh,
Yes.
to uh, to try to get the report from Quinn.
No, the report from the mayor. The Herald News wants the John Perry report.
Oh no, but they were also. I thought yesterday's case was on the Harding case.
Nope,
No.
nope, that's another case.
Yeah, they wanted Quinn. I was told that it was the Harding case. I'm glad I didn't go up there. I got tied up. I was planning on going up there to watch it, but unfortunately I had some things that I couldn't put off, and I didn't go up there. So if it was the Perry case, well, uh, yeah, I wouldn't have been quite as interested, although it does speak to the fact that you can't get any information from anybody in the cabal, whether it's Quinn or Coogan. You can't get any information, and nobody knows that more than you. If they paid for the ink for you making public records requests, they owe you a lot of money.
Well, they hit us with 5 cents a page, double sided, when you're requesting these documents. So I always request them in PDF format, electronic format. This way they can't do that. But what was interesting was Nelson couldn't make that hearing yesterday either. And he expected the decision to be rendered yesterday. And I explained to him that even during the recall, when we went to court, we didn't get the decisions for like 2 days, 3 days. So we may not have a decision on whether or not the city has to reveal these reports to the Herald News for another 2 or 3 days. And then there's also the possibility that the city decides to appeal it, which would definitely stop the whole process altogether. So it'd be very interesting to see what the city decides to do and what the Herald decides to do.
Yeah, I think I had that same conversation with him because I was expecting maybe even them ask for continuance, or as you said, most of the time in cases like this, the judge will say, "I'll render a decision," but they'll study it for a day or two. Whether they do or not is another question. But just for the optics, they normally don't render a decision instantaneously. So. Um, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the court rules on this because it's. I think a lot of prying eyes want to see, and the public has a right to know. I mean, the bottom line is any kind of agreement they entered into, any kind of thing they entered into, anything they did. Let's face it, they're supposed to be the agents of the people. They're supposed to be our representatives. They're not running the show. We're supposed to run the show. They're the people who work for us. And if we want to know if there's any kind of sheeny deals. So,
Well, it's going to be very interesting because if this goes the Herald News way and the Herald News gets the John Perry report and those documents, then the city's not going to have a leg to stand on for the Matt Malone documents, which we're still waiting to see because we haven't seen those yet. The other thing is that the city has historically tried to keep everything hidden. Everyone gets dismissed from employment with a non-disclosure agreement, which what do you have to hide? If they were fired, they were fired. Even the Malone incident has a non-disclosure agreement. And I have a problem with that because you're trying to hide something from the people. It's my money that's paying for this. It's my tax dollars that are paying for this. So I want to know what you are doing and why you're doing it. Now, when we go back to the John Perry incident, there was lots of rumors about criminal activity. Is there criminal activity? Could there be criminal activity? Do we have to protect the city employees who said something was happening because they may get subpoenaed in for criminal activity? If there was criminal activity, then you know what? It should be prosecuted. It shouldn't be hidden. But again, this is what we're going through, where we're trying to bring out the truth. And the Herald News brief that they filed says specifically that the release of these documents is important to the people of Fall River. It was important that the people of Fall River know what's happening. And they said, and they quoted it, and we say it all the time here, Paul Coogan ran a campaign on transparency and non-corruption. But what does he have to hide? Is he corrupt? I don't know. Something needs to be done.
No, you're right. Listen, I'm not even. If you had the money, and because I'll never hit the Powerball, no matter how I play the mega bucks. I can bet. I've played 1,000 times, thousands of times, and I don't think the best I ever did was like one number, even if I get 5 picks. But somebody should litigate that. I'm not even sure when you're dealing with the public, when cities and governments are withholding information from the people who they are sworn to be accountable to, I'm not even sure if those NDAs are legal, because they're doing it just to protect themselves. Because and I know, CJ, let's cut to the bottom line here. We know that most of these people, they get into it, they know where a lot of the skeletons are hidden. They know all the closets the skeletons are stuffed in. They know all the sweetheart deals. They know all the patronage jobs. They've got a lot of information. Most of these people have been around for a while. They've been involved at a very high level, and they know a lot of stuff. And they do not want that stuff disclosed, because that's what virtually they always end that way. It's like they're going to fire them. They're going to do this. They're going to hang them from the yacht on. They're going to make them walk the plank. And then all of a sudden, everything's gone. Bye. All right. They just disappear. Well, they made some kind of settlement, but we know why. They threatened to out them. That's what happens. It's like, okay, I'm going to tell everybody where the skeletons are buried. And they're going to know about everything that you did and all these other sweetheart deals that you made. And then it goes away. I think in my recollection, and we've got a long, you and I have a long history in this city. I think the only one who we ever got any kind of information about when they got rid of her was Janet Scott Harris. Remember? Many years ago. And then she ended up suing the city later and winning.
I remember that.
And the only reason they were forthcoming with her, well, number one, it was a different administration who was more transparent and who, by the way, didn't run on a platform of transparency. I see that's glaringly missing in this campaign. I don't see him talking about I'm not Jazel Carrere and I'm going to be transparent, because the record does not reflect that. But Janet Scott Harris came in from out of town. She wasn't here that long. So, yeah, you're right. This is outrageous. All these things happen. All these lawsuits are settled. And even if we do get them to divulge the amount of money that they settled with, we never know the specifics of the case. We know from letters that we saw in the Malone case about some of the allegations made against Malone, but we have no idea about the specifics of the investigation, what was discussed. And the reality is, they are our substitutes and agents. We're supposed to know this stuff. We've got all kinds of case law on it, But that's the problem with the city and government. They disobey the law. They ignore the law as often as they want because they're challenging you to spend your money to fight them in court. And then they will use your money to pay their lawyers to fight you. And most people do not have the financial resources to do that. I wish we did, but you're right. This is crazy that you have to jump through this many hoops and go through all kinds of public. And it's not only us. We saw the problem Nelson had trying to get records on a debt override. It's like that with everything we do, and we know that. It's like pulling molars. It's crazy.
It's never easy, that's for sure. It's never easy. But I'll tell you now, we have enough going on in this city that people need to really be looking at the candidates that are running for mayor. And you know what? I don't care what you think about Sam Sutter. I don't care what you think about Paul Coogan. I don't care what you think about Martin Vendel, okay, or whatever, Mark Vendel, whatever his name is. Vendel is his last name. Look at what they stand for, okay? Look exactly what they stand for. Because, for instance, Paul has always said he wants a transparent administration, yet we've never had one. Lie number one, okay? We start looking at his spending and his promotions for a more efficient government, and all that more efficient government does is make for a larger government, which means a larger salary base. And when you're looking at a budget that he has of, what is it, 300, 400 million dollars, it's not small. It's not small at all. Therefore, he needs to come forward and be honest about it. Now, everyone looks at Sam and they say about Sam, well, he charged a $10 trash fee. And I've met with Sam, Chip has met with Sam, and we discussed that with them. And he said he was listening to the wrong people. But the reason why he implemented that trash fee was to protect and maintain public safety, police and fire. Now, the taxpayers are always screaming, ranting and raving, give more money to the police, give more money to fire. But that $10 trash fee was just for that. It was for police and fire. But because it was called a trash fee, that was not acceptable. And that's the problem with the people of Fall River. And this is something that I don't think Sam understands. And this is something I don't think Paul cares about. And I haven't spoken to Mr. Vendel yet, but, I'm sure that at some point I will. People in Fall River want to be spoken to like they're the people of Fall River. Okay? Now, I've read a couple of position papers that Sam has published. People don't want him that way. Okay? And Sam wants to run on his resume. And he says that. I'm running on my resume. If people want to elect me, they're going to elect me on my resume. No, they're not. No, they are not. The people of Fall River are not going to elect you on your resume because they don't care about your resume. Your resume was as a district attorney or an attorney. It was not as a mayor. It was not as an administrator. It was not as a chief financial or chief executive officer. People want to know what you're going to do for them, and they want to hear it clearly. And if they don't hear it clearly, the vote line is going to be different. It's going to go for Paul, or it's going to go for Vendel. And you need to make sure you make it clear to people on a regular basis what you're going to do for them. I don't care if you're Paul, I don't care if you're Sam, I don't care if you're Vendel. You've got to make it clear of what you are going to do for the people of Fall River. They want smaller government, they want smaller taxes, they want representation of the people, not of the Ken Fiolas. And that's what people need to understand, and that's where it needs to be from. And if you can't understand that, you never will.
Well, look, you're right. But let's put it in perspective. It's not an excuse, it's a fact. He got in the unexpired term of another mayor. He had to deal with the budget. He was looking at cuts. He surrounded himself with people from out of town. They looked at the fee and said, I don't, he made a good decision, in my opinion, to not cut public safety or threaten it. And he basically implemented that fee. But what he didn't do is explain it to the people, as you said. And that's the problem. And he may have said that, well, I was under the gun, I had to do something, and I didn't have the time. But you got to make the time. That's what he doesn't understand. You're not a DA. When you're dealing with the people of Fall River, you got to explain it to the people of Fall River. And that's the key. That's the key fact that people have to be kept in the loop. The reality is that this is not, Newton and Wellesley and these, the people of Fall River need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it now. And it's more so now than ever because of the financial burden that virtually everybody that Paul is ignoring is suffering. It segues me into something really quickly to show you, because we're talking about now all of a sudden the council's worried about escalating rents and things. We went over that on the last show. It was on the agenda. But it was funny. I heard an interesting, actually not funny, it's tragic, that the average person is spending $709 per month extra because of inflation. That's $8,508 per year. And 60% of the Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. The income, so that means people in Fall River where the household income is around 48, 49, and the per capita income is 28. If somebody got a studio bedroom apartment for $18,000, then you factor in what they're paying for inflation. They're already in the hole. They're already in the hole. Now, if you get a family household income that has to get a 2 or a 3 bedroom and they pay a $2,000 rent, they're basically going to be virtually have no money when they're done, because you look, it's $24,000 a year, $8,508. That comes out to $32,008 out of a $49,000 gross income or $48,000 gross income. So you don't have a hell of a lot of leeway there, and that's the problem. These people, especially the Coogan administration, all they think about is developers, rich people. And they continue to say, rents are going to be good in the long run. Why? How are they going to be good on a low-income community? Where does that logic lie? That you have a city that has one of the lowest household and per capita incomes in the state of Massachusetts, and even nationally. But high rents are going to be good in the long run. Well, I can tell you what their rationale is, what their perspective is. What we get all these bums out of here and replace them with rich people. Well, the rich people aren't going to come here in mass. They don't come to a place that's got crime and underperforming schools. Those are the two factors that they look at the most. We saw what happened. They were selling houses in Detroit for $1. Nobody came to Detroit. Why? Because Detroit's a war zone. South side of Chicago, you can probably buy an apartment fairly cheaply because it's a war zone. The fact is, people that have anybody that can live in Boston and Wellesley and Newton can afford to live anywhere they want in this state because they have the money to live anywhere they want. So why would they live here rather than live in the burbs? Is this Boston where you can walk to things? You can go down and look at the Esplanade and stuff. This is what are you going to do in Fall River? The thing is, they're gonna go live in the burb. That's why Newton exists. You know, that's why Newton exists. Newton is a bedroom community of all the people that work in Boston and Cambridge. They all have very high incomes, and they'll commute to 15 or 20 minutes or take a T in because it's a close run to go to work in Boston. Newton doesn't have industry. Oh, you got to bring in an industry. Some guys say, oh, you got to bring in big industry. No, you don't. If you have a city that's attractive for people to live in, they'll live here. They'll commute to work. The majority of people in most cities don't work in that city. And we've seen what happens to cities that are dependent on one major employer. We saw what happened at Pittsburgh when the steel mills closed. We saw what happened in Detroit and Flint, Michigan when the auto industry tanked. And we saw what happened when the tractor John Deere had problems with labor. They tanked the entire cities. How many cities have we seen dry up and wither and die because the only industry where everybody was employed in disappeared? It's better to have a community like Newton. You don't need to have industry. You just need to have a whole bunch of restaurants and a whole bunch of shops. That's why Newton, which is a little smaller than us, actually a lot smaller now, has 10,000 more businesses than Fall River does. Why? Because their household income is $165,000, not $49,000. They got a lot of money to spend, and small businesses, which is the economic engine for smaller cities, they come in droves. You know, it's not rocket science. They try to BS people all the time that this is some complicated big mess. No, make this city safe, have a great educational system, and make it attractive for people. They can commute. Fall River's got a great location. We're right near I-95 and 24. You want to go east and west or north and south. You got a major artery at your discretion, and you don't need the T. You can drive your car if you want, because we've got a great location. But we got issues in this city that they all want to ignore, and that's the bottom line.
Well, I want to bring something up which I think is important to think about. Okay, the MBTA. We're getting the MBTA. We're getting the train. It's going to be coming here shortly. Yet the MBTA runs a bus from New Bedford to Fall River to Providence to the MBTA train in Providence. Does that make any sense? They're also running a bus from Worcester, which has the train, to Providence, so they can get the MBTA train. So there must be a problem with the MBTA train somewhere that you can't get to Boston from here, or you can't get to Providence from here. It's very, I mean, I know it's a roundabout way, don't get me wrong, but you're going to pay for a bus to go to New Bedford, to Fall River, to Providence, and Worcester to Providence, just so people can get the train? Isn't that a waste of money? I mean, this is why the T is having such a problem. This is why they're having such a problem. There's no question about it.
Well, you're right. You remember that political player from New Bedford called the Humble Bum? He was a pretty influential, actually at one time, pretty influential political player in the city of New Bedford. And one of his favorite sayings, and I agree, was, "Words without deeds are worthless weeds." And it's all we hear from politicians. And you're right. Why would you be taking a bus to a T station when you got one in the city? Listen, they've already closed the T station down at the Cape. You're going to not see Fall River's T station last very long. The ridership will not be there. You know, it's not like people from Providence are going to drive to Fall River to take the T. It's not like people from New Bedford are going to drive to Fall River. So how much ridership are you really going to have? And that's the key. And we all know the T is in massive trouble. They have all kinds of maintenance issues there. They're billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in the hole. And we produced articles when we were talking about the T that said there's no way they can get out of this hole. Even if the federal government interceded, there's just not enough. They're going to have to basically nix half of their ridership. Remember, people forget that the MBTA started as a local transit for the greater Boston area. That's what it was. Remember the old song? And you know, and he'll be riding on the streets of Boston forever on the Metropolitan Boston Transit Authority. So, you know, that was a lot, and it does have its use there because a lot of people don't like to drive into Boston. And if they can take a T ride, they'll stand and get crammed into those cars like sardines to get to Boston. You know, I did that. When we used to go to arbitrations, we know our arbitrations were going to run late. We used to go to Quincy Adams, take the T in. And in the late afternoon when work was getting out and we got out of an arbitration, I mean, it looked like New York City subway. You were crammed in. There were no seats. People were standing. You know, you could smell the person next to you, and hopefully they took a shower and had some deodorant on. Because I'm going to tell you something, you were jammed in there like sardines. But that's local traffic for the most part. And I can tell you that because I rode the red line hundreds of times. And that red line, we would pick that thing up. Sometimes we'd switch over from the orange because we went to an arbitration. But get on that red line and we'd come back toward Quincy Adams. But by the time you got through the UMass JFK stop and the Quincy stops, it was empty. The rest of the trip down to Braintree and Quincy Adams, the cars cleared right out. It's fundamentally local traffic. You don't have a hell of a lot of ridership because it's a long, cumbersome ride, especially during rush hour because a lot of people are getting on and off. They take a little longer at every stop, and then you got to deal with issues with cars being delayed or derailment or something like that. So there's always a problem on a T. But the reality is, listen, the T is just another piece of a puzzle. Will it work? I don't think so. I think ultimately they're gonna close it. But the reality is that's not the issue. The issue is stop trying to bullshit the people and tell them these fairy tales. Like if we get one big industry in this city, we'll be all set. No, we don't. We already got a big industry. Amazon didn't fix the city. That if we do this, if we do that. No, it is a multifaceted fix. And the first thing they do that they never talk about is educating our workforce, having apprenticeship programs, public-private partnerships, things that are going to allow the people of Fall River to get better paying jobs where they actually might want to commute to their job and come back and spend their money in Fall River. And then if they have small businesses, it creates more jobs. Like they did with the mills. Everybody had a job, but every storefront on Pleasant Street was full and every storefront on South Main Street was full. It's about employing people because when your people are basically getting incomes of 28, and look at this income. Look at that per capita. The household income has spiked a little bit more. It's still way low, but it's spiked because the rich are getting richer, not that the poor are getting better. Because if you look at that per capita income and go back 5, 6, 7, 8 years, there hasn't been much movement. It was in the 20,000s 10 years ago. And we haven't gotten to 30,000 yet, and it's 2023. That tells you something if you actually look at numbers and know how to interpret them and analyze them. And it's even more dramatic because remember, there are people making a lot more money today, and to keep that, it's still in the 20s, shows that the poor people are still poor, and they're even poorer proportionately. So, you know, this is all a big election year smoke and mirror thing. Everybody's going to do everything. We're working on the streets. We're worried about homeless encampments. We're worried about everything except crime. That wasn't in that agenda. Nobody's going to talk about the crime. But all that stuff that they're talking about, they've been ignoring for nearly 4 years. So it's all election year hyperbole from these clowns. Look at what they've done for 3 years. They blew all the opera money and didn't spend a dime to make the poor people's lives easier. The homeless are increasing. Nothing's done. It's election year. Take everything they say with a grain of salt, and the numbers do not lie. Go to the U.S. Census Bureau and look at the per capita incomes and compare them. And people would come to Fall River if it was safe and had high-performing schools, because that's what they look for. And we have access. And it could be a marketable city. But politicians don't care about that. They just line their pockets and move on.
Well, what's really interesting is, this all started with public transportation. Here's something that a lot of people in Fall River don't know, because I didn't even know until yesterday. The Route 6 bus line, that's Pleasant Street, has been canceled. I believe it's effective August 28th. There will no longer be a Route 6 bus line. What they're going to do is they're going to take the Bedford Street line and kind of jerry-rig it so it runs through Pleasant Street a little bit to give it a little bit of coverage, but there's not a lot of coverage. So Pleasant Street, the Flint, gets the Abrota once again. I tried to call Carlos. Carlos didn't answer the phone. I left him a voicemail message. He still hasn't called me back, but the Flint's getting Abrota again. And where's the mayor? Because the mayor sits on the SRTA board. Where's the mayor? Why didn't he say no? The Flint needs their bus line. That bus line services seniors. We have 2 senior complexes at the end of Pleasant Street over by Eastern Avenue. How are those people supposed to get anywhere? How are they supposed to get to the doctor's appointments, to the market? How are they supposed to get anywhere? And because they shut down the Pleasant Street bus line, guess what also happens? The bus line to Walmart doesn't happen. They're going to have some of the other lines pick up some of the loss, and they're going to cause them to go to Walmart every half hour, as opposed to right now, which is about every 10 or 15 minutes, because they have 2 or 3 buses which actually go there. So again, the people of the Flint, Abrota. Paul Coogan says, Abrota to you. You get nothing.
Well, Paul Coogan and maybe Bloomberg too. Remember what Bloomberg said when they said people couldn't afford electric cars? Well, go take a bus. Well, now you can't even take a bus. You can't afford a regular car. You can't afford gas. You're living in a low-income neighborhood, and it shows what they think about the low-income people, and especially the Flint. The Flint area is basically persona non grata. They don't want to exist, because you know that Carlos and Paul are always butting heads. They don't care. Oh yeah, we're going to fix the Flint with some market rate housing. Sure you are. And you're going to displace virtually everybody in the Flint, because there's really no high income, areas in the general real Flint area. And I'm not talking about the greater Flint area, because then you take up Northeastern Avenue or stuff you can classify as a Flint. But look, I grew up in a Flint. I've lived fundamentally in a Flint my entire life. And even when I first got out of the military, I lived on a corner of Brayton Avenue and Jefferson Street. That could almost be considered part of Flint. But that was only for a few years. And then I moved back when I bought my home into the Flint. This is the real Flint. Because in the old days, I'll tell you what people from the Flint considered the Flint. The Flint started at Stafford Square. And it did not extend much beyond Bedford Street, and then went to the Westport, then Lafayette Park. That was the core of the Flint. That's where all the mills were. That's where all the 3-deckers were. That's where St. Anthony Desert Church was. That was where Espiritu Santo School was. That's where they had the communities of people who worked in the mills. That was the Flint. Now they expanded it to include some other areas. But the core of the Flint has always been blue collar, fairly low income to moderate income people. That's why nobody cares about the Flint. You know, they never built a high school in the Flint, but they sure as hell built another one in the North End. And I very rarely agree with Steve Camara, no relation. But he was right when we should have built two smaller high schools, like they did in Cranston, Cranston East, Cranston West. Less transportation issues, probably more effective education. But then again, they don't care. It's all about them. And when you look at your politicians today, ask them, are you going to be my representative? Are you going to question their spending? Are you going to follow the money? Are you going to demand an audit? Are you going to look at the way they spend things? And if it's not in the best interest of the people of Fall River, are you going to step up like Michelle Dion has and represent the people of Fall River?
Well, you're right. And that's what we need. We need somebody to represent us. And it's time for the voters to make sure they ask the questions of the people running for office. And I've seen a couple of comments on Facebook by people like Gabe Amaral. We've had Paul Amaral on the show. I've spoken with Josh Texera about him coming on the show. And hopefully these people take the opportunity to appear on our show and talk to our viewers. I want to be sure to thank you all for watching. And remember, stay safe. We got a comment from Carlos. Once again, no communication from the administration. I found out because you called me. Of course you found out because I called you. How else would you find out, Carlos? There's no other way to find out. Because you know what? This is the way it is. Fall River doesn't care about the Flint.
You mean Mr. Transparency didn't call you? What a surprise. I'm flabbergasted.
It's amazing, isn't it? Well, I want to thank you all for watching, and remember, stay safe, stay angry, and hold your politicians accountable. We'll see you on Monday.